Good evening, brothers. Thank you all for coming to this momentous occasion, the Legends and Leaders panel of Kappa Psi. I mean, it's the first time that I can think of. We've had 11 past Grand Regents together and 2 past executive directors. So very excited to see the wisdom that they have for all of us. Oh, I'm sorry, you're correct. My apologies, past Grand Regent Fitzpatrick. 3 past executive directors. You're correct, as always. So, as such, though, I would like to introduce them all to you before we get started. And then the format will be, after I'm done with the introduction, starting with past Grand Regent Campbell, each of our esteemed guests will speak for about 7 minutes. And after that, whatever time is remaining, we'll have Q&A with the audience. But as such, starting here with past Grand Regent Norm Campbell. He served the fraternity in that role from 1972 to 1974. Next to him, past Grand Regent William Fitzpatrick. He served as a Grand Regent from 1974 to 1979. I'm sorry, and Executive Director, I don't know the year, sir.
71 to 73.
And Executive Director 71 to 73. And so that's what I was about to ask. So next to him is former Executive Director Don Floridia. And he served in that role from 72 to 80, so it's a little bit confused with the timeline.
I don't know. All right. It don't make any difference because nobody knows it.
And next to him is past Executive Director Robert McGarian, who served in that role from 1980 to 2000, so 2 decades of dominance for him. All right. And next to him is past Grand Regent Father Patrick Wells, and he served from 1983 to 1987. And next to him as well, past Grand Regent Ken Roberts. He served from 1987 to 1989. And following that, past Grand Regent and current Executive Director Johnny Porter. He served as Grand Regent from 1991 to 1993. John Grossmanides, past Grand Regent, served from 1995 to 1997. Past Grand Regent Brian Furbush, he served from 1997 to 1999. Past Grand Regent Brian Reesitter served from 1999 to 2001. And past Grand Regent Tony Palmieri served from 2003 to 2005. Past Grand Regent Lawrence L.B. Brown served from 2007 to 2009. And finally, but last but definitely not least, past Grand Regent Callie Weaver served from 2011 to 2013. There are also, if you notice, some gaps in that timeline. I'd just like to fill them in for you, and some of them have sent letters. And from 1989 to 1991, the past Grand Regent was William R. Smith, who is now deceased. From 2001 to 2003, oh, I'm sorry, I totally skipped somebody, someone very important. From 1979 to 1983, the past Grand Regent was Brother Dewey Garner, and he actually wrote a letter to us. He says, "Greetings to you, my Kappa Psi brothers. For those of you who know me, know that Kappa Psi has been a significant part of my life for over 50 years, and how disappointed I am not to be present with you. Most of my closest, lifelong friends are in this audience, and many on stage today. I am definitely with you in spirit. Trust me, you will leave this Grand Council Convention with a better understanding, a deeper appreciation, and a greater enthusiasm of what your fraternity has accomplished over these past 136 years. So sit back, relax, and observe history before you. I must be brief because just as work expands to fill the time of any number of bureaucrats, this group of old-timers will fill the time for this Legends program. So may God bless each of you." From Brother Dewey Garner.
God bless Dewey.
God bless Dewey. So from 2001 to 2003 was Brother Paul Hiller, who's recently passed on. From 2005 to 2007 was Brother Dave Maskowitz, and he actually wrote us a letter as well. "Dear brothers, members of the Executive Committee, and fellow past Grand Regents, it is with great regret that I am unable to be here with you in Denver this week as you work for Kappa Psi. Unfortunately, my wife Cheryl's health issues have made it nearly impossible for me to be able to travel at the present time, as I need to be home for her. I attended my first GCC 30 years ago at the 42nd GCC in South Padres Island, Texas in 1985. It was that first GCC that changed my life in Kappa Psi. I saw for the first time that Kappa Psi was so much more than my own chapter doors. That brotherhood had meanings beyond anything I had imagined. It truly was the adventure that changed the shape of everything that followed in my life. I hope this GCC and the brotherhood you experience here can make a difference in your life. I challenge you all to always see the possibilities that are all around us to be a little better tomorrow than we are today. In Kappa Psi, in your careers, and in your daily lives, the only limits you truly have is your own imagination. Any dream is possible with hard work, determination, and perseverance. If you can dream it, you can be it. Wishing you all the best GCC possible this week in Denver. Take care and safe traveling. Fraternally, proud to be your brother, David Maskowitz. And last but not least, of course, Eben Welch, Past Grand Regent Eben Welch, served from 2009 to 2011. And he would have loved to have written a letter, but as stated earlier at the general session, he's had some recent health issues which have prevented him from doing that. But he did communicate to us verbally that he wishes us all a great time, and he's really sad he can't be here. But with that being said, no one wants to hear from me. And so we're going to start with the first esteemed guest, Past Grand Regent Norm Campbell.
Thank you, Brother Grand Regent. In my undistinguished athletic career over my life, in baseball particularly, I was never a leadoff batter. My time at the plate was usually way down towards the bottom, so this is a whole new experience for me. And so my instructions were to get on base and hope somebody else drives me in, and that may or may not happen. How to approach my 7 minutes has been as puzzling for me as I'm sure for my colleagues. So I'd like to just talk about how I got here from where it all started. And it all started in the Beta Epsilon chapter, where I was initiated, and a year later I became chapter historian. Eventually I was the chapter regent. But as historian, I was responsible for monitoring a very important chapter visitation by then Grand Regent Nicholas W. Fenney. And I took pictures with a Brownie Hawkeye camera with film. For those of you that don't know what film is, it's a thing that rolls up. It's not exactly the same as a card from your digital camera. I had them printed. They were black and white. Sent them to the mask, and months later, I was excited to see them turn up in my chapter's report in the mask. At that point in time, I realized I was part of something big. And I hope every historian out here, and I admonish you if you don't, and I see the editor sitting in the front row, send them what you've got. That's part of our history, but that's not why I'm here. My first national office was Grand Historian, 1963. I tried in 1961. My campaign manager is sitting 2 places to my left. Brother Floridia was a delegate from Mu chapter, where I happened to be the Grand Council deputy at the time. We didn't quite make it in Atlanta, but we went back in 1963 when he had moved to California and organized the people out there, and we got elected. As Grand Historian, I wasn't even a member of the executive committee. That's how much the Constitution has changed over time. I was a Grand Officer. I wore a Grand Officer pin. I went to all of the same functions, but I did not sit on the executive committee. In the interim between the elections in the afternoon and the opening of the reception prior to the banquet that evening, I got a phone call from Dr. Frank Eby, the iconic Frank Eby, inviting me to his and Mrs. Eby's room for drinks before the reception. And I thought everybody was going to be there. I got to the door and it was very quiet. I knocked on the door. I said, these grand officers must drink silently or something. I opened the door and there's nobody there but the 2 of them. And Brother Eby took me aside, congratulated me, took his pin off and said, this is my Grand Officer pin. I want you to have it, but you have to promise to keep going. I haven't even been sworn in yet as Grand Historian, and he wants me to pledge to work towards Grand Regent, which I did, and the rest, as they say, is history. I was also influenced as a faculty member by former Grand Regent, the past Grand Regent, Heber W. Yunkin Sr., who was an emeritus professor when I taught at MCP, and we shared an office, and about once a month he would come in, and I got no work done that day. He sat there and he leaned back with his high button shoes and would start his stories with, "Brother Campbell," and off he went. He too encouraged me. So I moved on and went through a number of subsequent offices and eventually got to New Orleans for the 1972 elections. And I may get a little emotional.
We voted for you.
Forgive me, I know Fitz voted for me. Paul Hiller came to me and said, "Your big brother sent me here to get you elected." Ron Gautieri was his GCD, and to this day I thank him who has passed away and Paul who recently passed away as well. I followed Gus Dante, who bore the brunt of the cataclysmic financial hole we were in. It took years of effort by a lot of people, including primarily Fitz, who carried a lot of it after, to get us out of that. At the 1974 GCC in Kansas City, we spent a considerable amount of time talking to federal agencies about our membership standards. And I don't know how much I spent on phone bills talking to Washington, but it became very, very clear that we were going to eliminate gender from the criteria of membership. It took a little while. We finally passed it during Bill's administration, and in 1975, I believe, we implemented the removal of men from membership. So for those of you that are concerned that we really didn't think about this till last Thursday, trust me, it was in the works for a long time. Now, it wasn't all draining work and effort. I'd like to share a couple of stories. What have I got, 30 minutes left?
No.
Oh, all right, I guess I've used all my time, so I'll tell you the stories when you ask questions.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Pastor Grand Regent Campbell. Yeah, so if if their time allotment runs out and you want to hear what they had to say, ask a question during Q&A and say, "Excuse me, what were you about to say before the time ran out?" If the Q&A is not as lively as we hope, then we will always, of course, use that time to see what other stories they would have for us in memories. I do want to correct myself. Actually, I do apologize. Paul Hiller was Pastor Grand Regent from 93 to 95. And Craig Johnson, who I did miss, which is sad because he's a very good friend of mine. He was Pastor Grand Regent from 01 to 03. So I do apologize for that. But with that being said, our next Pastor Grand Regent and former Executive Director, William Fitzpatrick.
AKA Fitz. Norm, you took 3 of my minutes. I only got 4 minutes left. Come on. Oh. And, yeah, I know when I got the Robert Bliss Award 2 years ago at APHE, I couldn't talk. I think some of you might have been there. My voice went left, and Norm got up and said, "You're all lucky because he talks too much." But I want to thank the fraternity for inviting us here. This is fantastic. The minute I got the email, I was very excited. Kappa Psi means a lot to me. Some people say, "Are you proud to be Kappa Psi?" These are the pins. These are the pins that I collected over 50 years as a member of Kappa Psi, and I joined Kappa Psi. My membership card's right here, original one, and Gamma Pi chapter. Any Gamma Pi people here? St. Louis graduate. I reactivated St. Louis graduate in 1965. I was a region of Gamma Pi chapter and held other offices. I went on to be a satrap of Province 7. Went on from there after graduation, became the first assistant executive secretary appointed by the executive committee. In that position, became part of the fraternity, and Don Flirty filled it a couple of times during his time. And then we have the lost decade of the 70s, which we're not going to get into. It's history, it's past, we got through it, but it was a very trying moment. We had some financial issues that created some big problems. I was appointed by the executive committee at that time as executive secretary, which seems to be lost also. Every time I turn around, everybody forgets that. But, you know, it doesn't bother me because I had some great years to do what I wanted to accomplish, and it was a challenge to me. I was married at that time. I opened up a new pharmacy. I had a lot going on, but I took that position over salary-free. I took that position over temporarily because I told the exec committee this is not my goal to be executive secretary. Even though I was the youngest executive secretary since Dr. Eby at that particular time, but I wanted to put the fraternity back on staff, back in a positive mood because I had a lot of great faith in the fraternity. 18 months later, I told the executive committee, you got to find another executive secretary because I'm going on to be Grand Regent, which I did accomplish in 1974, held that position for 5 years. Only one since 1980 to hold it for 5 years, but it wasn't an accident. It was because I had to cancel one of the Grand Council conventions, so that took one of my 2 terms to a 3-year term. And it was a great ride. I really enjoyed it. I was the Grand Regent on a centennial, on our 100th anniversary in Scottsdale, Arizona. I got the book up here. There's my beautiful picture with that full black beard. I don't have it anymore. Also, my family was there. My 5 daughters were there. My 5 daughters still talk about Kappa Psi. They gave me 12 healthy grandkids. I'm very blessed. And I also remember, and most of you don't have this, but here's the original history of Kappa Psi. You're welcome to look at it when you come up. Written by Frank Eby. Then we came through, and we have one that Dewey Gardner put out. Dewey wrote in the book to Bill, my mentor, colleague, and brother. Thanks for being a great friend. And then we have this latest one that was put up by Callie and her friend Michael. So we do have a long history in the fraternity, and over the time and years, I was asked and fortunate to be able to write in a few of the mass. There's 4 copies of the mass that I was able to put articles in, and if you pull them out, there's one in there in the summer of 2013 where Ben Welsh makes a statement in there, and he says, 2 occurrences that I believe are important to the change of our fraternity. First was the early 70s when we went through a tough economical period, but with the outstanding effort of Bill Fitzpatrick, we made it and survived through it. The other one he said was the admitting girls into Kappa Psi. Now, I want to correct something because there's a young lady sitting out there that was there when I made this most famous statement, which all you girls are going to be excited about. But as I said at that time, during that time period, it'd be over my dead body before there's any girls in the Kappa Psi. And that statement is made a matter of record. Well, I corrected that years later. And I made the statement, if it wasn't for the females' attendance in the Kappa Psi, we wouldn't be what we are today, and some of you chapters would not have been existing. So I congratulate you for hanging in there and becoming an integral part of our fraternity, and I'm proud to have you as a brother. I also had an article that I wrote about my remembrance, and in there I show all my family. And it's, now you're making me get emotional. But
Where's the Kleenex?
but anyway, I'm proud to be here. Kappa Psi I've been very successful. I don't mind talking about it. If you don't talk about your success, nobody else will. In professional pharmacy over 50 years, and I contributed the majority of it to my involvement in Kappa Psi. Like I say, I was involved with Kappa Psi on a national level over 20 years. I've accomplished a lot in the profession. I was a member of the Missouri Board of Pharmacy, president 5 consecutive years, which nobody has topped yet. And as far as that amount of time in the seat of chairman or president, and I'm involved in NARD, NABP as an honorary past president, and I'm still active in that. But I'm retired now, enjoying life. I'm a cancer survivor, 7 years free of it, and I'm doing it. I'm gonna pass this on to Don, because that's what when I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in 18 months, Don stepped in and took over, but I stayed involved until the mid-'80s.
Thank you very much, Brother Fitzpatrick. And now, my mentor, which means I'm blaming him for everything you've ever seen me do. He was my GCD when I was coming through Kappa Psi, Brother Don Flaherty.
Thank you, Eric. You know, this is a tough act to follow, but that's the story of my life ever since I've been in Kappa Psi. He's got me into all the problems and the trouble that we've had. But as I am up here basically as a result of these individuals, particularly Dr. Norm Campbell. He was my GCD when I was the regent at MU chapter in Boston, and our first Grand Council convention was in Atlanta, Georgia. And boy, I can remember the MU chapter people really put a mark in Atlanta. They wouldn't even serve us at the restaurant because we came down and said we were descendants of Sherman. And that did not go over very nicely, but in addition, we took a train from Boston down. I'm sure Norm remembers this, and that's why he has a little less hair. But unbeknownst to him, we would be wiring ahead to the stops to have beer loaded onto the car, and we did some damage. But the dean at that time made a decree that no longer would any function that required sending Mass College of Pharmacy students to any meetings would go by train. You had to fly, because we were sued, I think, on that somewhat.
That's why I went to law school.
Yeah, that's why I went to law school. But anyway, to make a long story short, I went out to California and became very involved with Gamma Nu chapter, and at that time we had a different executive secretary, and things were going fine. But then for a variety of reasons, Kappa Psi went into some dark times. And I recall that the last Grand Council convention that was on an odd year was in 1969, and that was in Buffalo. And I could tell you some stories about that, although Kappa Psi didn't get blamed for putting the sodium lauryl sulfate into the big fountain out in front of the Hilton in Buffalo. We were sharing the convention with firemen, and they got the blame, but it was Kappa Psi that did that. But that was the last convention in the odd year, and then we ran into some dark times, as Bill alluded to. We ran into some financial difficulties, and a Grand Council had to be canceled for 1971. And that's when, you know, I was working with the MU chapter people, and I still have a tremendous love for the fraternity, and was getting very angry about what was going on a national level. And when Bill brought the convention together in 1972 in New Orleans, and we had the meeting out at the Holiday Inn across from the airport in New Orleans. We weren't even downtown. And I know I made a lot of concerns voiced at that meeting. And I remember sitting at the bar having a drink, and Norm Campbell coming up to me and putting his hand on my shoulder, says, "Congratulations, you are now the executive secretary of Kappa Psi." And so we ended up moving. No, I'm not crying about that one. But we moved the office to Stockton, and we spent that year, and we started rebuilding. And we did not pay the chapters to come to that meeting because we had no money. But my accomplishments, I feel, with the help of Bill and Norm and all the officers that are sitting at this table, we were able to have our next Grand Council in 1976, which was the bicentennial in Philadelphia, and we were able to pay the chapters to come. And then my greatest accomplishment was putting on the Centennial Grand Council, which was the 39th GCC in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I had a chance to review some of the paperwork, and you cannot believe what the cost of the rooms were. They were $34 a night at the hotel, and this is a 5-star resort that we were at. But that was my greatest accomplishment, and that is when we turned over the mantle to my next mentor here, Dr. Megarian. Thank you.
So they're doing my job for me, but the next speaker is past Executive Director Bob Megarian.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here, and I don't think I have as many stories as these gentlemen just expressed, but after 20 years as the Executive Director, I have some things to tell you when I dealt with 8 grand regions. To keep them in line was quite a task, but I thought, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I need some room for my notes, thank you. No, I'd like to start out and tell you how I got into, I'll need this, into Kappa Psi. When I was a pharmacy student back in the late 50s at Ole Miss, I was approached by pharmacy students and asked me to go to a smoker. Well, back then we had smoking, and now we don't support such policies. But we would go there, and they'd have cigarettes out on the table and everything, and we'd smoke. I was smoking at the time, and we would have this get together. Well, I was married, and my wife and I, we had our first daughter and we were in pharmacy school, and she was pregnant with our second daughter. So as a family man, I didn't want any part of fraternity, and I thought about this, and I said I had the family obligations, so they convinced me we need to go, and you'll like what you hear. So I went to the smoker, and I was really impressed. Back then, of course, we were all male, and all of the officers and the members were dressed in blue blazers and very professional. That kind of impressed me, not the smoking, but the place was filled with smoke. But how they were dressed, and then the region of the chapter gave such a nice history of this fraternity that I realized immediately the richness of this fraternity, and I thought, you know, in a way, I'd kind of like to be part of this. And so the other thing that influenced me, that several of the faculty members in the pharmacy were there, and they were Kappa Psi, and the dean of the college was Kappa Psi. And they talked about their experience as pharmacy students and also as academicians, and how they loved Kappa Psi, and I thought they came to this meeting, this smoker, take time from their schedule to be with us, and that impressed me a lot. So I joined Kappa Psi in '58. I've been a member over 50 years. But then my career didn't stop there. I went on with one of the faculty members, ironically, was my mentor for my PhD at Ole Miss. And so when I got my PhD, I went to Kansas for a year for postdoc, and then I went to St. Louis College of Pharmacy, where I taught. And during my graduate career, I wasn't involved too much with Kappa Psi, but Gamma Pi at St. Louis got me interested, and I really got turned on again. So when I left there in 1970 and became a faculty member at the University of Oklahoma College of Pharmacy, I realized that I looked around, and Gamma Omicron was the chapter, but it was not, it was inactive. And the reason it was inactive is World War II in the 40s took all the brothers out and they went to war. So in 71, I reactivated, and I was the GCD there for 9 years, and well, actually 10 years, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with the students, with the officers, and the reason I enjoyed it is that you talked about leadership. Brother LB talked about leadership and that. I'm going to cover a few, but it's universal, so you can't help from repeating some of these things. The thing I enjoyed is that seeing the students or the brothers in Gamma Omicron being shy and this and that, and I'd encourage them, and they would, I said, take your time. You don't have to be the regent. Get on a committee, give a committee report, stand up in front of the group and give your talk. And so they started doing that, and they overcame this fear, and then some of them became regent, and to see them grow made me very proud. So around 78, Brother Fitzpatrick came to our chapter for a visit, and I talked to him and said, you know, I really like working in Kappa Psi, you know, at the GCD level, but I'd really like to do something more at the national level. And he said, well, what are your interests? And I said, well, I'd like to be executive director someday. And he said, well, you know, set your goals and what have you. So I did, and I was fortunate enough to be selected by Brother Dewey Garner, who Brother Gupta read his letter here. He appointed me, and never forgot I got an interview from Brother Campbell on the telephone, and it scared me because he's so well respected in the fraternity that I thought, oh God, how am I going to pass this guy's test? But he was very good to me, and apparently thought enough of me that he recommended to the executive committee that I be the executive director. So what did all of this teach me? Working with 8 Grand Regents over 20 years, and well, first of all, I wouldn't accept the executive directorship except under one condition, and the condition was that my wife had to be my administrative assistant. While I was at Ole Miss, she was administrative assistant to the Associate Dean of Engineering and other deans, and I knew I couldn't handle this job without her. So they agreed, and so we became a mom and pop organization for her. I'm going to have to use this.
Charmaine's a great gal, isn't she?
Yeah.
And you have 1 minute.
I have only 1 minute. I haven't even got started. Well, anyway, we handled it, and I wanted to talk about my some of my. How am I doing? I only have 1 minute.
You ought to stop now.
Jeez. Am I done now?
You are, yes, sir.
I don't like stop. Well, I had a lot more to say.
Yeah, we'll come back to you,
Okay.
Brother McGarrian. All right, so next up is Mrs. Please. And next up is past Grand Regent Patrick Wells.
Thank you very much. And thank all of you for inviting me. I'm the crybaby of the group. Okay. I'm 84 years old, and I've lived a very, very involved life, been very happy in everything I've done, including my association with Kappa Psi. I joined Kappa Psi in 1959 as a graduate student at the University of Nebraska. The undergraduate chapter invited me to membership, and so I joined them. And from that moment on, I started working in all areas of Kappa Psi, with regional meetings, province meetings, and all. I was there with my men from Nebraska, and we participated fully in all these events. Now, I'm African American, and so A lot of times people ask me whether I was the first African American to join the fraternity. I thought I was until I looked into the records at Nebraska, and there was another young man who was initiated before me who was black. He was not very active, and I never could find him again. But so anyway, I was the second black to enter the fraternity. I started going to national meetings. I was in, I think maybe my first one was in New York. Not New York, Philadelphia was
76?
no. But anyway,
Philadelphia was
anyway, I would start going to the national meeting. I was first appointed like a graduate member on the executive board. And I stayed on the board in some capacity until I became Grand Regent. So from, I don't know when it was many, many Grand Regents I met with and was with. I have the exact honor, though, of being probably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I am the only person who was elected to national office and I was not present at the convention.
That's right.
I was elected not even being present, and I thought that was a great honor there. During my tenure as regent, we looked at various things. McGarren and I had to rewrite some of the booklets to try to make them more, what's the term for that? Current, but also to get the maleness out of them and try to get the gender out of them. And we did that. We looked at alcohol use in our chapters. We looked at risk management and hazing, were things that we looked at during that time. I also tried to reorganize the provinces. And talking about a strong province was Province 7 with doing that group. And I tried my best, but they had enough stronghold over everything that we could not change the provinces. So when I got into all these various provinces, I said, wow, things really have changed. I haven't enjoyed it. I've never regretted one moment that I've spent working in Kappa Psi, working with these men up here that have been such an influence on you and an influence on my life. I'm going to use my time now just to tell you a quick little joke that they kind of mentioned we could do. I had a meeting in Nashville, Tennessee at Meharry Medical College, and I had promised that I would go to Lexington, to the University of Kentucky, to give a speech, and I can't remember what anniversary it was or whatever it was. But so when I get to Nashville, the president at Meharry said he would give me a car and a chauffeur, and they would drive me to Lexington for the meeting. So he did, and I got in, and I told the driver, I said, I'm going to be in there, but at 8:30, I will return so we can leave early to go back to Nashville. So I go there, we have the dinner, and I get up and apologize to everyone that I had to leave and on and on. So I go downstairs, and there's no car and no driver. And I wait, and I wait. And these people come out of the banquet, and they say, you still here? I wait. Finally, I call the president of Meharry. The driver just left me. And he called Kentucky State and had the police chief to come pick me up, and then got some students to drive me back to Nashville for the meeting. That was overnight. And so when I got there, it was like 5 in the morning for my meeting in Nashville. That's not the end of it, though. I have to go to Purdue. So I fly into Chicago, get ready to go to Purdue. I get on this plane, and this lady sitting next to me, she said, oh, the luggage won't go tonight. I said, I beg your pardon? She said, the luggage won't go tonight. I said, why? She said, the plane is full. They can't take any luggage. So I had to go to their banquet dressed in whatever I had on. I don't know what I had on, but it was not presentable to be at the banquet, I'll tell you that. So I got that, and then now I have to get back to Chicago to stop the people from putting my luggage on the plane to Purdue. And I finally got that straight. A friend was meeting me. He was at the arrival gate. I was at the departure gate. He almost got a ticket because I was at the wrong gate. He takes me home in Libertyville. We have a great dinner, great party. He takes me back to the airport, and I run out of gas. So here I am in my red coat, waving cabs, stopping cabs to get to the airport. Anyway, that's what Kappa Psi is all about, running around getting lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Past Grand Regent Wells. And now, Past Grand Regent Ken Roberts.
Is this on? Okay. You want me to shout? There we go. Thanks, Johnny.
Here to serve.
I was initiated in Kappa Psi on April the 9th of 1965, so this is my 50th year as a brother in Kappa Psi. And that means that everyone to my right has been in the fraternity at least 50 or more. You've heard from Patrick that he was initiated in 1959. And I've certainly had the distinguished pleasure of working with these men, these brothers, all of these to my right and some of these to my left. And it's been a great honor to be a participant in the leadership team of our beloved fraternity. I want to begin by thinking just a moment or two about the origin of fraternities. And in our country, they began in the early part of the 18th century, and certainly right after the Civil War, given the camaraderie that the survivors of the war had experienced, there was a tremendous growth on the university and college campuses of fraternities because of that band of brothers that had been formed during their years in the military and during those years of conflict. And so I think of that band and those bonds that I experienced initially in those very short 2 years in pre-pharmacy in my social fraternity, and how warm that felt, and how close it felt for those men, young men, and that organization that I was a part of. And certainly that was my beginning and my aspiration then, a welcome to fraternity life and participation. And so when I went to the University of Tennessee in Memphis, I was eager and interested in the professional fraternity system, and initially, certainly as soon as possible, pledged Psi chapter at the University of Tennessee. I was fortunate to ascend into leadership positions as vice regent, and then my 5th year in pharmacy school, the baccalaureate program, to be the regent of the chapter. But in my vice regent year, I had the privilege of being a delegate to the Grand Council Convention in San Francisco. And that was in those days, it was in the week between Christmas and New Year. Neat time to go to San Francisco. It was foggy out there then. You ride those cable cars, kind of spooky in some respects and enchanting in another. But at that meeting, I remember Norman Campbell. I remember Frank Eby. I remember August Dante. I remember Brother Doty, the historian emeritus, and a number of those folks that truly sunk the fraternity deeper into my soul. And but of course, you think I graduated from pharmacy school in 1967, and what was happening then? The Vietnam War, and we had a draft. I was fortunate to get a direct commission to be a pharmacy officer in the Navy. Went in the Navy and served with pharmacists, fellow Kappa Psi brothers. Came out and I went to graduate school, used every minute to get a master's degree, and I went down to Ole Miss to get my PhD, and who was my major professor? Past Grand Regent, but before Grand Regent, Dewey Garner. I was his first PhD student. And he was truly my mentor to continue my activity in the fraternity. I made a few stops. I came back to Tennessee in 1979, and within a couple of weeks, I was invited to be the Grand Council Deputy of Psi Chapter. I accepted that, and 2 days later, the Regent came to me and said, Dr. Roberts, we have 6 girls here in school that want to be members, brothers in the chapter. How do you feel about that? This is in August of 1979. And I said, Steve, I have 2 little girls, 2 daughters. And I want my daughters to grow up with no more barriers than you've met or any other hairy-legged boys. I said, send those girls in to see me. They came in, they were giggling. We had a good visit, and within 3 weeks, they were initiates and brothers in Kappa Psi. And I warned the brothers, the boys. I said, they're going to put you to work. And within 6 weeks, they were out there painting the house, and the house had never been cleaner because it was scuzzy when I got there. One more story along that line. Oh, 1 minute. Holy smokes. I will tell this story about Gamma Pi chapter. One of those young women that was initiated the second year, her husband took a job when she was a second-year pharmacy student in St. Louis. And she came in to see me, and she said, Dr. Roberts, my husband's transferring, and I want to be active in the Kappa Psi chapter in St. Louis, but I don't believe they have young women up there. And I said, well, they may not, but we can work on that. She said, well, what are you going to do? I said, just sit down. We're going to make a telephone call. And I called the Grand Council Deputy, and his name was Leonard Nager. And I got him on the phone, and I put it on speaker, but I must confess I didn't let him know it was on speaker. And I said, Leonard, how you doing? We went through some chit-chat. And then I said, Leonard, I have this fantastic brother of Psi chapter who is transferring to the St. Louis College of Pharmacy. He said, how about that? I said, yes. And this brother wants to be active in the Gamma Pi chapter. He said, well, that is wonderful. I said, I knew you'd feel that way about it, Leonard. He said, I sure do. And I said, and her name is. I became active in the province and supervisor of Province 8, satrap of Province 9, and kind of moved up in those offices. I was elected Grand Vice Regent in 85, Grand Regent in 87, and at Williamsburg, I was the, that's when I became the past Grand Regent.
That's the longest minute. Now you're showing partiality.
Is it over?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Past Grand Regent Roberts. Next up,
Thank you.
the man we all know from roll call, current Executive Director, Past Grand Regent Johnny Porter.
Thank you. Well, I'm probably the only one up here that never wanted to be a pharmacist. It all came apart. It all came apart by 3 of my friends, Vietnam. They would convince me to stay in school a year longer, but if I went to pharmacy school, it'd be an extra year and a year of internship. 50 years later, here I am. I graduated, they didn't. So, but I've never looked back. It's just been the best thing that ever happened. And on August the 21st, 1971, I was initiated into the Delta Beta chapter at Southwestern. I went to one of those smokers where the girls held cigarette packs and a little thing like this. And They had on short dresses, and we smoked a lot of cigarettes, and I listened to a guy named David Coates, who recently passed away from Beta Kappa. And he told us a story about
Can you stop the clock?
yeah, only because he died about 6 months ago. Anyway, he tells us a story about him and his wife. He was at Pitt, and they went downtown. Of course, Duquesne was closer, but they went downtown to a movie on Saturday night, and when they went in, it was just fine. When they came out, it was a rainstorm. They couldn't get a taxi. They couldn't get nothing to take them back to where they lived near the school. They went into a drugstore trying to use a phone, and one of the guys there, it was 10 o'clock, they're getting ready to close, and the pharmacist said, well, where are you trying to go? He said, well, we need to go back to Pitt. You know, I'm going to school up there. And he said, well, let me close up and I'll take you. He said, okay. David said, he said, where you go to school? He said, I'll go up to Duquesne. He said, well, you ever know any of those Kappa Psi boys up there? He said, yeah, I'm one. He said, well, you stay right there because I'm going to take you home. That sold me. Sorry. But that's what sold me off the fraternity, and I never looked back. Went to some province meetings. The first one I went to was in 72. That's where I met Bob McGarry and had on a strange hat. He remembers the hat, doesn't remember me, but you know. And I also met Dewey Garner that year in the bottom of the Gamma Pie house where there was sawdust and beer that was about 6 inches thick. That's where I met Dewey. And the next year we go to Oxford, and that's where I met Fitz. He doesn't even remember, but he was sitting outside his motel room. That's what you went to in those days, motel rooms. And he was sitting outside, and I was sitting outside, walked by him, and he said, you want a beer? And I said, yeah. And we talked a minute, and, you know, he asked me where I was and all that. And I said, well, you know, I'm really interested. I said, I'd like to have you a job someday. Never dreaming that it ever come true. Anyway, I don't even kind of remember how I got to be convention chairman in 1985. Bob and Pat Wells convinced me that South Padre Island was the place to go. And being a boy from Oklahoma, I'd never heard of it, so I became the convention chairman that year and got elected as the Grand Historian Ritualist in 1985. And I was elected through the offices in 91. I was the convention chairman for W.R. Smith when we went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I was elected. And that was always a fun time. You know, in those days, the fraternity was lots of fun. I've met lots of people that we've had millions of laughs with. It's just been a wonderful journey over all these years. And probably the same 6 pledge brothers that I had, who were my closest friends, are still my closest friends. I know where, well, one is dead now, but I know where all the other 6 are. I know their phone numbers, and if they called me today and said, can I borrow 10 grand? I wouldn't ask them why. I would just say yes. They would do the same thing for me. I didn't say you were one of them. Wait a minute. But anyway, that's the kind of friends that you make in the fraternity. And then somehow I became editor to the Mass for 14 years, and then here I am today. I mean, it's been a fun time because I don't know, you really meet the best friends you'll ever have here, and I did, and I hope you do.
Thank you very much, Brother Porter. And next up is past Grand Regent John Grissominides, also president of the Kappa Psi Foundation.
Thank you. Well, my story started in April of 1982 when I joined the Beta Epsilon chapter. I can remember the regent of that particular year was a gentleman by the name of Emilio Squilante. And he was the one who approached me and came to me and said, hey, look, there's this organization that the pharmacy school has called Kappa Psi, and you should really consider coming to the pledge meeting and the rush meeting and see what it's all about. And he was the one who encouraged me to join, and I did. I was initiated in '82. The next year was GCC. It was in 1983 in Myrtle Beach. And a group of my classmates and I, there were 6 of us, who decided that we were going to go down to Myrtle Beach to learn more about the fraternity. As industrious brothers that we weren't just going to get a room. We decided that we were going to get the biggest suite that they had at the Landmark Hotel. And so we got this 3-bedroom penthouse suite. We shared it with some of the brothers from Mu and our brothers from Beta Epsilon. And we had a party in that room every single night. And I'm sure most of the people on my right will remember that because they were telling us to keep it quiet. But that was really the start of my exposure to the national fraternity, the national brothers, meeting people like Bob and Dewey and Johnny and Fitz. I ran actually for collegiate member at large that year and was fortunate to win. I think I was the first Beta Epsilon brother to win collegiate member at large at that time. And that started a streak that now spans, this is now my 17th GCC. So that one episode in my life really molded me to want to continue. The following year, we went to South Padre, where I ran against Paul Hiller and Johnny Porter and lost both offices. But that was a good thing because it made me want to keep coming back and keep trying. And so the following year, when we went to Orlando, I ran for graduate member at large and was successful. Did 2 terms as graduate member at large, which is unique to do 2 terms, but I did. And then we went to Jackson Hole, where I was elected Grand Counselor. And then in Marco Island, I was elected Grand Vice Regent. And then kind of in my own backyard, the 47th GCC was hosted by Providence Graduate Chapter and Beta Epsilon in Falmouth, Massachusetts, Cape Cod. And we had a wonderful event. It was one of the largest GCCs at that time. I think we had about 370 or so people, and was blessed to be elected Grand Regent. And I can't tell you, the leadership skills that Kappa Psi taught me were leadership skills that really helped me through my entire professional career. We talk about leaders coming from Kappa Psi, and it's really those training grounds, from being a chapter regent, from being a satrap, to serving on the National Executive Committee, that helped me to then go on to become president of the Rhode Island Pharmacists Association, president of the Rhode Island Society of Hospital Pharmacists, and then I also belong to this Greek-American organization called the HEPA, and a couple years ago was elected to lead over 25,000 Greek Americans, which was an unbelievable experience. Because of that office, I was able to go to the White House and meet the President of the United States, Prime Ministers of Greece, President of Cyprus, President of Turkey. And I remember walking up to the palace of the President of Turkey thinking, I don't know how I got from pharmacy school to becoming a diplomat of the United States government, but I thought Kappa Psi really had a role in having me go up and become the leader that I was. And if it wasn't for Kappa Psi, those things would never have happened. So I strongly encourage all of you to be involved, to take leadership positions, to develop your leadership skills, because it really, Kappa Psi does make a difference. During my Grand Regent years from 95 to 97, I would go to Bob with some crazy ideas, and Bob was always there to listen and every once in a while he'd be there to say, yeah, that one's a good one. And I know one of the ones was that we decided that, actually back in those days, the awards dinner was all done at the banquet. There was no awards luncheon. So when we went to the 1997 convention, as I was outgoing regent, we actually started the awards luncheon. So that was one of the things that I was able to kind of initiate back then. So we also started the golf tournaments that we do, and the softball. We had a softball tournament that year. We had a volleyball tournament on the beach. So we started a lot of fun things. We actually, at the 47th GCC, had actually entertainment for the first time after the banquet. In those days, the banquet got over so late, you didn't have any. But we actually had a band that came and played at the 47th GCC. So, you know, and I've been blessed to meet a lot of the old guard, from Nick Fenney to Milton New Roth to Glenn Sparandio to Gus Dante. It's just been a tremendous ride. I can't say how much the brothers have meant to me, from Dr. Campbell, who's been a great mentor, a friend of mine by the name of Brian Russell, who passed away, but he was there from the beginning. And also a friend of mine, Mike Deweese, who I met at my first GCC, who always encouraged me, always said that, you know what, keep trying, you know, you can do this, don't give up, don't get down. If you don't win, just keep coming back. And those guys have always been in my corner. And this guy here to my left, when he starts talking, he was always in my corner as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you for coming today, and thank you for this wonderful experience that is Kappa Psi.
Thank you very much, Past Grand Regent Grossman-Benitez. I always have trouble with that, always will. Next up, Past Grand Regent Brian Furbush, who, when I was a collegiate, was the first first Grand Regent that I ever met, and I was like, oh no, and then you know, we've had a very good friendship over the years. So welcome.
Thank you. I sit up here on this table, and I'm kind of, I don't know how I got here. I really don't, literally, by plane. But I mean, I don't know how I got to this position, but I know I am fortunate to be here. I answered a newspaper ad at the University of Rhode Island. I'm a Beta Epsilon initiate. You'll hear Beta Epsilon quite a bit up here. We've got a long history of serving the fraternity. Went there were about 6 guys in the whole chapter, and I think basically I showed up and they said, congratulations, you're initiated. And I think about 2 weeks later, I was the historian. So it was quick. And then next thing I know, for whatever reason, somehow, I ended up going down to Williamsburg in 1987, 89, and ran for office. I was running for collegiate member at large. And really it was, Dr. Campbell was our GCD, and he was my professor. He knew me fairly well. And I say this quite often when people say, in his class one time, we were talking about something. I said, well, shit happens. That was when that was a big popular saying. And Dr. Campbell really lit into me. He said, it doesn't happen, you make it happen. But that was the kind of student I was. So needless to say, when I said, hey, Dr. Campbell was like, yeah, you should go ahead, run for collegiate member at large. Let's see how this goes. And of course, John was at that point like, yeah, go. I can't wait to see you lose. Because I was running against Steve Nager. Now you've heard Bill mentioned and Ken mentioned Lenny. Lenny Nager, for those of you who didn't have a chance to meet him, was a cult of personality. This guy was just a whirling dervish. There was no way I was beating his son in anything, nothing. I mean, Steve walked around like, hi, I'm Steve Nager, collegiate member at large. Yeah, I'm gonna be the collegiate member. So I was pretty much out of my realm when I got down there. But the trip down, we went down. Dr. Campbell used the University of Rhode Island van, which was probably his first mistake, letting me drive. Dr. Campbell has memories of it probably because it was so horrifying, but it started with me leaving my wallet back in my dorm room. And somewhere along in Maryland, I was cutting my nails and they were hitting the back of his head. So for Dr. Campbell, it was probably more disastrous than it was for me. But by the time I got down to Williamsburg, Yanni was already there, John was already there, in office, and I was just running around like a madman trying to understand the politics of all that was going on. And by some miracle, I had won election. I beat Lenny Nager. Don't ask me how, but in retrospect, we do know how. And from there, it was really, after that, I mean, my only really big claim to fame, I'd love to tell you some stories about my time as Grand Regent, but I really didn't do anything. By the time I got there, I had run for office in Kappa Psi. I started out as collegiate member at large and ran for every office. I only ever ran for one office, and no matter how many people were on the ballot, I always won on the first ballot. And so I only ran for office 5 times, and I won all 5 times. But back then, at least in the 80s and such, the politics that were going on were such that it was a crazy time. And by the time I became Grand Regent, I was pretty much burnt out. And on top of that, I had Yanni in front of me, who was always one office ahead of me, and was Mr. He got all the money from all the drug companies. He knew everybody, knew all this and everything. Behind me, I had Brian Reeseter, who was 20 times more intelligent than me, 20 times more motivated than me. So really, by the time the whole time I was running for office, I had these guys on either side of me. It was pretty much, I was pretty much didn't have to do anything. But I was fortunate in that I did have a chance. I was sort of at that vanguard where we had a lot of our rich history of Kappa Psi members in Dewey Garner and William R. Smith, who I love dearly. And he specifically asked me to be a pallbearer at his funeral, which was touching. Paul Hiller, Johnny Porter, Bob McGarian, who now I'm going to get emotional. You thought I was going to make it.
He had
Anyway.
3 minutes on the over.
Oh, yeah, 3 minutes. Shit. Damn. Just me.
$20?
Yeah. Damn. Damn you, Furbush. Damn. Sorry. But, basically a lot of guys who I had an opportunity to work with, and Bob, who was a true mentor, and all of them were. And certainly Norm Campbell and Yanni and Brian and all these guys. I had great opportunities to work with so many intelligent, motivated people, and I've learned so much. And mainly it was a lot of, it gave me a really thick skin for life. And that's one of the great things I learned from Kappa Psi. All the province caucuses, which back then were literally, you were under a light, they were screaming at you. It was somewhat miserable. But you do have a thick skin when that happens. And I tell my wife the stories about Mike Harchberger from Montana. If you're out there, Mike, you and I still have a couple fist fights to go. I don't know if you're out there. I met so many people who just hated me. And it was great, honestly. It was just, it builds a thick skin when people feel and they look at you as like, Furbush, he's entitled or whatever, and it was just, it really did, Kappa Psi's really, honestly, made me the person I am today. And there's probably these guys and the people who aren't here, I literally think of every day. Am I still in the under? Okay, good. But that's been my experience. It's just been just an amazing experience from hitting Dr. Campbell with fingernails, all the way to just unfortunately seeing some of our members pass. Like some of the names we've mentioned, and so many people I've gotten the opportunity to meet and interact with, and it's really just. Literally made me who I am today, and I can still remember that first day of sitting in Williamsburg with Ken Roberts and Bill Smith and Paul Hiller and Johnny Porter and Bob McGarian. I didn't have a chance to work too much with Fitz, but I did have an opportunity to spend. I spent a lot of time at Gamma Nu at University of Pacific, where Eric's at, and I've become very close with Don Floridia and all the guys out there. I was out there seemingly every other weekend. For one thing or another, the football games, the wine tours, and those are friendships that have lasted forever, and all those guys. And I didn't get a chance to see Eric become the Grand Regent. I wasn't here 2 years ago, but I certainly. I don't have my glasses. Do you have your glasses? What's that?
It says stop.
I was the Fidel Castro of Kappa Psi at one time, but I'll let those go. I'll let those days go by. But, thank you.
Thank you very much, Past Grand Regent Furbush. And at my first GCC, In past Grand Regent Furbish's outgoing Grand Regent speech, I did see him cry, so I was actually waiting for it. But with that being said, past Grand Regent and current Foundation Treasurer, Brian Reese.
Before we start, I want to show you something. You look all the way up and down here, you see people's notes that they have. There's 4 words on his. He went 9 minutes, and when he started, this was completely blank. He put the 4 words on there after he started talking. I've watched him for 20 years do that. I don't know how he does it. I got to have my notes. For those of you sitting up front, you see this and you can see what it is, but that's $1,400 that I got from SEP. I wanted to take a little bit of my time to thank SEP for doing that for the foundation. There's another $1,300 on top of that for a total of $2,700. Plus, I'm not keeping that. Of course, Tony insisted that go to the foundation. You know, I listen to these guys talk about their terms, maybe not so much up here, but just behind the scenes about some of the struggles that they had. Brian alluded to this a little bit too. You know, what's that old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times? It must not have been that very interesting when I was Grand Regent, because we had a blast. I really enjoyed my time. I had these guys on both sides of me here, plus Radar. Cameron Van Dyke was on the executive committee with me. And we had a lot of fun. We enjoyed each other's company. This guy went to bed really early, about 8 o'clock, so the fun usually started at 8:01. But we had a great time. The one thing, I guess, challenge that happened during my term, it didn't happen, it was scheduled actually during my term, was Bob McGarren said that he had 8 Grand Regents and 20 years of being an executive director. I was his 8th and last Grand Regent. And I did want to say something about that. You know, when he started doing that, he was the same age as the people that he was working with. They were peers. By the end of that 20 years, he's, in no disrespect, he's the age of my father. And he is a very much a fatherly figure to me, and one of the biggest reasons and one of the biggest mentors I have in this fraternity, and one of the reasons that I got to be Grand Regent. But it's such an important role in this organization as executive director to mentor people like us, to be good leaders, because no matter what you think of this position, once you get here, it's never quite what you assume, and it's nice to be able to have somebody come and talk to you beforehand and tell you what to expect. So mentorship is just a very important piece of this, to me, this whole concept. I did want to talk about my first province too. John Grossmanides mentioned his. Times have changed a lot. Mine was in 1987 in Orlando. We had 150 people, and most of the 80s, 150 was pretty typical from my understanding. I was a little odd in that I went to my first GCC when I was already satrap of my province and a graduate. I was in the Iowa graduate chapter. In fact, I was the only one from Province 8 at the entire meeting. I didn't know anybody going down there other than, well, maybe 2 people. Lynette Wheel was there. I'd met her once before, and a couple of the other past Grand Regents that have already talked. I had a stack of proxies. Whatever you think about proxies, being the only delegate from Province 8, it wasn't quite that big, but it was pretty big. And the reality is that a lot of people come and talk to you when you have a lot of proxies. And it's easy to make friends when you go into that situation. I had met Paul a couple times before, but that's where I really got to know him. And the thing that probably impressed me the most, of course I'm talking about Paul Hiller, the thing that impressed me the most about him is he could have cared less about that stock of proxies. He wanted to talk about Kappa Psi, he wanted to talk about leadership, and he wanted to talk about how we could make Kappa Psi better. And if I had to think of one person that really led me to think about Grand Regent someday, it would have to be him. And I know I missed that because I had a conference call yesterday, and I know that was very nice. Another thing that happened at that province meeting, or the GCC, is I'd never been to one before, and as I mentioned, I didn't know anybody. And about 2-3 months beforehand, I got a phone call from John Grossmanides. And he called me up and he said, I understand, a friend of mine told me that you're going down there and you don't know anybody. How would you like to stay with us? So that's where I got to know John Grossmanides. And
just bring all those proxies.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure that was for all altruistic reasons. Real quickly, I wanted to tell you one other thing too. I have kind of an interesting professional path as it comes to my relationship with this fraternity. My first 2 jobs came from Kappa Psi's. 2 of my pledged brothers were Kappa Psi, or I have worked with them professionally. I was in Chicago, and things weren't working very well for me with the graduate school. Bob McGarrian sat me down when I was Grand Regent and said, I can tell things aren't going well with you with graduate school. And we need to talk. We need to figure this out and make this work for you. So we went out and had a beer and we talked through it, and he said, if you're not happy with the education you're getting, you need to transfer. And well, who's department chair at Old Miss in pharmacy administration? I was working on my PhD in pharmacy administration, but Dewey Garner. So he convinced me to talk to Dewey Garner, and Dewey and I talked to each other, and he said, you know, Brian, the decision, I was Grand Regent at the time, the decision to come down here is yours, not mine. If you want to take some classes over, if you want to get your PhD from our program, you can do that. Just give me some advance notice. If it hadn't been for that conversation and it hadn't been for Dewey Garner, I wouldn't have met the guys that became my business partners. MME as it exists today, and my involvement in MME wouldn't exist. And so 5 years later, as soon as I could get the financial bearings together, I put that MME research scholarship together because I'm fully aware of that, and that might give you a little insights as to why I did that. I'm probably down to about 1 minute. Eric gave us some questions that we could look at kind of to think through this. And one of the questions is, what advice would you give to the people sitting out in the room? And I thought through, and there's a lot of things that you could say, but I thought the thing I would say is say thank you. You know, this is a volunteer organization, and it's hard, and I run a business too, and I have employees. Positive reinforcement is easy with employees. You can pay them, you can give them bonuses, you can give them promotions. That's a lot easier. We don't have that in this organization, and so it's harder to do. And negative motivation, you know, that's about as corrosive as you could get in an organization that's supposed to be fraternal bonds. So thanking people is really the only asset that we have to get things done. Let people know that you appreciate them. Tell them how important what they're doing is to the big picture. Give them a vision, and then thank them afterwards for what they do. They deserve it. So with that, I'm done with my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Grand Regent Brian Reesetter. I almost said Furbish, I was looking at him. And next up, Pastor Grand Regent and editor of the Mass Emeritus, Brother Tony Palmieri.
Thank you, Grand Regent Gupta. Few notes. Why I became a brother. I became a brother in Beta Epsilon because of faculty role models and friends. The faculty role model sitting at the end of the table there, and the other one was George Osborne, who I've modeled myself after. I've tried to become as arrogant as he was. And I've made that, yes, but I haven't become as brilliant as he was. But what Kappa Psi gave me as an undergraduate brother was the chance to fail in a friendly, welcome environment. And we all need that because we don't succeed. I must have run for national office at least 9 times before I wore the brothers down. The only way they were going to get rid of me was to elect me. So I'm glad I wore them down. I'm not up here because of anything I did as Grand Regent, although I'll tell you 2 stories. I'm here because I was editor of the Mask for 15 years, at a time when we had 16 pages if we were lucky. But that's fine. I enjoyed every minute of that. And Brother Dewey was the one who appointed me, and when we would go to meetings together, usually APHA, Dewey and I would room together. And if you ever talk to Dewey, he makes Ken Roberts sound like a speed speaker. Dewey would say, it'd take him half an hour to say hello. And he'd be talking to me, and we had separate beds, okay? Not that there's anything wrong with it, but we had separate beds, and we'd wake up in the morning, and he said, what's the last thing you remember, Tony? So, and then he would tell me again. And Brian is right. I used to go to bed about 8:01. And in San Diego, told the hotel to contact me regardless of the time if there were problems. And it was an outside pool, and about 10 o'clock at night there was a problem. So I got all dressed and I went down. And they were quiet until about 1 a.m. Well, I went down in my University of Georgia shorty PJs. Get that vision out of your mind. But it worked, because all through the rest of the convention, security would say, when there was a loud party, "Don't make me go get the old man in his pajamas." And they were quiet. My heroes, my role models have always been Kappa Psi. And they were Kappa Psi brothers before I ever knew what Kappa Psi was, because I was probably 6 or 8 years old. And I went to a pharmacy, and there were 2 different pharmacies. And there was a guy by the name of John Campoli and another one by the name of Anthony Solomon, who gave my family medicine and food on credit. We probably still owe Anthony Solomon about $200. And he was a true patient-oriented person. He, looking back on it, he and Campoli really embraced our ideals of industry, sobriety, fellowship, fellowship, industry, sobriety, and high ideals. Okay, they really did that, and I didn't know that. All I knew was they were pharmacists. And then I got to the best day of my life as a Grand Regent was when I presented Golden Mortars to Norm Campbell, Anthony Solomon, and John Campoli. And it brought it all back. It showed me what role models were, whether they were brothers or whether they were not. So all of my role models, all of my heroes have been Kappa Psi brothers. It is not by coincidence that you see 4 Beta Epsilon initiates here as past Grand Regents. It's because number 1 was our model, and he expected us to become that, to become leaders, okay? Now, along with that, you brothers have become my role models, okay? The brother, and I am embarrassed to say I don't remember his name, but the brother that talked this morning about substance abuse, Ryan, he's my role model. You brothers are my role models. And someday, you're going to be up here, and you're always somebody's role model. And so finally, my advice to you is every day, you need to regenerate, and we all regenerate differently. I regenerate by getting away from you people. I did that last night. Now I was glad to see you again. Okay? So you regenerate, you laugh, you love, and you cry. And I did all 4 of those yesterday, talking to a brother I did not see in 20 years. And it was like we had never stopped talking. And it's brother, father, Dr. Patrick Wells. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, past Grand Regent Palmieri. And that party that he was coming to break up was actually Gamma Nu chapters, and we actually have a picture of him in those pajamas.
And that was a scary sight.
Yeah, and next up, yeah, you were there for that whole scenario too. And next up, past Grand Regent Lawrence Brown.
Well, thank you. So first off, I just want to let you know that there's a dividing line between Brother Palmieri and myself, right? Because at Palmieri ends the legends part of this, and then starting with me, we just go to the leaders, because I in no way say that I'm a legend of Kappa Psi at all, but I am very grateful to be here and to be able to share some of my stories with all of you. And you know, one of the things that's interesting, I think, about my path to where I've become is that my first day of pharmacy school at University of Pacific, I met a guy who just came up, and he's like chatting, how you doing, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, that dude's pretty cool, you know. And he was like, yeah, I'm Kappa Psi, and we have, you know, a rush event, you know, you want to come by and talk to brothers. And I can tell you, though, I knew about Kappa Psi because I worked for Kaiser Permanente up in Northern California for about 6 years before starting pharmacy school. And almost all the pharmacists I knew graduated from UOP. and almost all of them were Kappa Psi, and those guys were cool. So I'm like, these students must be cool as well. So I went to the Rush event and really got engaged in Kappa Psi there. Although I held no offices. Well, I did hold one. I was webmaster. But I didn't hold any Kappa Psi offices because I was really interested in the APHA ASP, and so I went up the ranks there with class president and ASP president and Speaker of the House and so forth. You guys heard about that yesterday. But I always stayed connected, always went to the meetings, always went to Basil's afterwards. That was a local watering hole, if you will. But just really, had a strong love. And my thing that I would tell the brothers is that when I go out and I do things, within APHA, I'm bringing the Kappa Psi name with me. Because whenever I get introduced, I'm always introduced as a member of Kappa Psi. And I felt that was really important. And, my first GCC was actually the summer after I got initiated in 1997. It was the Myrtle Beach GCC. And I do want to mention one thing. So I pledged in 97, where the Grand Regent was Brother Grossimanides. And you can imagine, as a pledge, having to not only pronounce but spell Grossimanides was probably the worst part of hazing that we had at Gamma Nu. But eventually, I think 3 years later, I finally was able to say it clearly, yeah, and spell it correctly. But I went to that Myrtle Beach GCC, and that's where I met so many of, well, I met all of these guys there, from Dewey Garner all the way up the line. And for some reason, they, were really nice and pleasant and kind of welcomed me. And over the years, they've all been great mentors to me, which I've been so appreciative for, because Kappa Psi was like a family, and that's how I felt at all the meetings. I've been to every GCC since '97, except for Kalispell. Not that Kalispell wasn't a wonderful location to go to, because I heard it was a great GCC, but I was moving to Minnesota for my PhD, and it was at the same time as the GCC, so I couldn't make it. But so many people have been influential in my life. Obviously, Brother Don Floridia, who now has 2 Grand Regents under his belt from Gamma Nu, so we're moving up on Beta Epsilon. Hopefully, we'll be able to match that number pretty soon. But Gross and Dewey, and with Brother Patrick Wells, that's the one brother and past Grand Regent that I had never had an opportunity to meet. Now, when I became Grand Regent in '07, I did actually reach out to him, and we communicated through email when he was out on some cruise ship with his ministry. But I was pleased to see him yesterday. In fact, we had dinner across the street, me and the Gamma Nu boys, and someone mentioned that Patrick Well was in the lobby over back in the hotel, and so I left. I ran back across the street, went down the escalator, and saw him there, and I just said I wanted to say hi, because I'd heard so much about him and thought so highly of him, and that's what these brothers do for the profession, is they really set the bar high. And I'm just going to close, when you talk about my term as Grand Regent, there's some not dark days of Kappa Psi, but we had some kind of gloomy days, and part of it was politics, and part of it was the unity of the profession was kind of breaking apart a little bit. There was not quite talks of secession, from the fraternity, but there's just a lot going on. And I know in my Grand Regent speech, I talked about wanting to unify Kappa Psi again, and I can say, hearing the conversations at this meeting, hearing the backstories and stuff that's going on, I can say, without a doubt, we are so much more unified as a fraternity today than we were back then, and that's thanks to all of you guys, especially the collegiates, who've been really passionate about Kappa Psi and having us be one, because Kappa Psi is for life. And lastly, I want to say that you're really lucky to be able to be in a fraternity. I travel internationally quite a bit. I go to Europe and Asia, and they don't have fraternities over there. I talked to them, when I first started going, I was like, well, do you guys have, anything like Kappa Psi? And they don't. And I'm like, man, what a lonely life. I mean, I can't think of going through, my college education and pharmacy school education without having the experience of this brotherhood of a fraternity. It's made such a difference in my life. We go to weddings for brothers, and whenever you go somewhere, if you need a room, I mean, Brother Gupta won't say this, but there's a brother that came down at the last minute and didn't have a room, and Brother Gupta's letting him stay in his suite, right? You know, and in a separate bed, of course, you know. But not that there's anything wrong with that, but but I mean, but that's always the way. We always have brothers come in at the last minute and say, "Oh, just room with us," and so forth. And that's what brotherhood's about, and I think that's what makes Kappa Psi the #1 fraternity in the universe. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Pastor Grand Regent Brown. And now, last but of course not least, I've served with her the longest, Pastor Grand Regent Weaver.
So I am Callie Weaver. I'm from the Gamma Zeta chapter at Samford University down in Birmingham, Alabama. Like some of my fellow past Grand Regents, I tend to talk a little slow, so all y'all Northerners are just going to have to hold on for it. You've heard a lot about mentors, and that's really one of the best pieces of advice that I can give. And I kind of joke when I say this, but I would say everybody needs an old guy, right? And I don't mean like an old guy, because I consider myself an old guy at this point too. But that's kind of what you hear running through everything, is someone who's been there and someone who's done it and someone who kind of knows the ropes and can give you a different perspective. And I've been really, really fortunate to have all of these past Grand Regents be mentors for me. And then Brother Dewey Gardner is one that is amazing to just email any question that I have about anything, whether he was in the fraternity yet or not, he knows. I mean, it's just such an amazing resource, and he is more than willing to just, you know, get on the phone or email and give all these answers. And it's one of those things that I'm really, really fortunate, because throughout my time on the executive committee, I've reached out to all of the past Grand Regents for that kind of advice and mentorship, and it's something that I do think is very important. So while I was Grand Historian, I learned a lot about the chapters by doing, at that point, what we called the History Update. So I got back copies of all of the masks from 1990 to 2007, and read all of them, and read all of the chapter articles and tried to summarize. And I really learned a lot doing that, and reading back issues of the mask. Learned about things that I'm not sure the chapters even realized had been going on for as long as they had, that were just very, very traditional things. So I published that, and then later that was added to and published as a book with the then Grand Historian Mike Knoyer. So that was a pretty big accomplishment with the two of us working on that, to get another history book out there. Significant things while I was Grand Regent. So the most obvious one is that I was the first female Grand Regent. I'll be honest with you that I personally don't feel that it was all that significant, because I tend to think of myself more as just one of the brothers versus a male or female or anything like that. And that's the way I was always treated in the fraternity. And my first province meeting, there were only 3 females. I mean, I just got that vibe, though, that we were all accepted. There were 3 females at the province meeting. They were all from my chapter. So, you know, it kind of was pretty exciting to go to province, actually. Just saying. We did use that as a recruitment tool to get other females to come to province. But it's one of those things that I know the women before me definitely paved the way. And you heard about the discussions that were had back in the 70s with Title IX and things like that. So it was one of those things that all the women that came before me really, I think, took the brunt of that weight, and I just kind of was able to come in as just a brother and be elected. The other thing that happened was province realignment. So that was something that was a long time coming, I think. The provinces hadn't been realigned since the 50s, except for the dissolution of Province 6. And Brother Eben Welch actually started seeking maps from brothers just to get ideas, to see where we were in this, how far off we were from where everybody was thinking, where people's heads were. And I remember during my speech, my first speech as a Grand Region, I said, you know, we're going to realign provinces. And I think people were like, yeah, we've heard this before. And everybody that knew me went, oh, crap, we're not going to have our provinces anymore. And it was really thanks to, and really fortuitous, that I had the executive committee that I had, because that was Brother Eric Gupta, Mike Kanoria, Matt LaCroix, Letha Radhakrishnan, Harry Marcelin, Ben Welch, Johnny Wong, and Johnny Porter. And I locked them in a room and said, we're not leaving until we have new province lines, and you don't get your cell phones. So we turned off internet access, we turned off everything. The only thing I think that I allowed at some point was for someone to look at a map. We put a big giant map on the wall and just labeled all the chapters and started drawing and started trying to figure out what our goals were for the provinces. And that's kind of where we started, was what is a province? Why do we have provinces? What should they be doing? What do we want them to do? And so we kind of went from there as to some of the province lines, and some of them are a little funky. I admit we split quite a few states where you're kind of looking at it and going, what were they thinking? And we really wanted to make sure that we didn't have any provinces that were single state provinces, because those brothers have the opportunity to network with each other at state association meetings. So we wanted to make sure that we included at least 3 states in each province to allow for a diverse opinion. So if you look at like the Southeast province, by 3 states, it's 1 whole state and 2 partials. So, but that was really important to make sure that we got a good diverse group in every province. But at the end of that meeting, we all came out, we had new provinces, and miraculously, it stayed a secret. And that was really impressive from everything, is that it didn't really get out, and I ended up appointing 2 sets of supervisors that year, one for the old provinces and one for the new provinces, to try and transition over. And during that process, too, in a trip to the central office, I actually looked through all the records to see if I could find anything about what they did in the 1950s, and came across the documents that showed that the Grand Regent then actually appointed all of the satraps for the province lines then, and decided I didn't really want to do that. We came across appointed a committee with Brother Christy Askew, the Province Transitions Committee, and they really helped us out. It was graduate brothers from every province and the leaders from every province to make sure that we kind of knew what we were doing and got their feedback. And so what we ended up doing is the supervisors acted as satrap for the very first part of the meeting, and we really mixed up the order of business to try and get elections as early as possible so that the supervisors weren't really the ones running the province. I mean,
Sorry to cut you off, but that's payback for the no internet in the room, you know, for the whole realignment thing, you know. But thank you so much, Pastor Grand Regent Weaver. And now it is some time for questions from you guys. Although we do have to get back to Bob to finish this at some point. But let's take, if you don't mind, a question or two first. Is that all right?
No, I don't.
All right. So there's a mic there and a mic there. And if one of you would like to ask a question of our esteemed panel, please approach the microphone.
Steve Lundeen, North Carolina grad. Y'all obviously won a lot of elections as you moved up in the ranks in your chapter, your province, and on the international level. Could one of y'all, or maybe 2 of y'all, talk about an election that you lost that, you know, maybe particularly stung, and how you bounced?
One. Sorry. Can't help.
Well, you know, and kind of how you bounced back from that, especially since there's so much emotional involvement in the fraternity.
All right. I am indeed the biggest loser. I have probably lost more elections than every other brother up here combined. It helps you grow a thicker skin. It helps you realize that maybe you're not as good as you think you are, Palmieri. But more than anything else, it helps put everything in perspective, and it teaches you resilience. I'm not kidding when I said I wore the brothers down. And it does that. And then it helps you, the other thing that helps you is it teaches you, it gives you a comfortable place to fail. So after I lost, Brother Campbell would say, well, maybe next time, or Brother Grossimonides would go, nah, 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 nah. But the best thing was the comfort from the brothers. And then you just try again. That's all. And that's the way it is.
One quick story. I lost to this guy, and when I was kind of kidding him about not having any nose, this is one of the most gregarious people I've ever met before in my life, and I knew there was no way I was ever going to win to this guy. But I lost, and as you know, as politics go, sometimes people that are working on their side or do things that make people on this side mad. And at the end of that thing, we had words. There's no doubt. We had some words over how that thing went. And the serendipity was, both of us ended up having our flights changed because of weather. And we got up this next morning and went to the airport. And they both put us on different flights. We ended up sitting next to each other the next day for the entire ride home. We had a great conversation. We've been working well together ever since.
And if I could just piggyback on that, I mean, I joke around about having not have lost, but I always, whether it was Tony or any number of people, and one of our good friends, Sean Higgins, who, I mean, same thing, just so many losses. And to some degree, I do regret never having experienced that, because I have so much respect. Yeah, I mean, I have so much respect because, you know, I would see people coming back and I was like, oh my God, that was really a testament. You know, I never felt like I could prove how truly much this fraternity meant to me. And when I saw people like Tim or Brian, or so many people come back after these devastating losses that were really, I was there because of politics, and they were there because, or they weren't there because of politics, but they kept coming back, and I was like, these are the people who love this fraternity, because they, you know, that's their character, is they keep coming back and saying, I want to serve. I want to serve. So, but yeah, it's, I mean, I mean, it's just amazing. You know,
the other point, and I'll make it quick, is that invariably, even though it hurt, the brothers make the right decision for the fraternity. And the other thing that I don't think the executive committee has mentioned is that they are not they do not exist during this convention. The entire future of Kappa Psi over these number of days, especially Saturday, is in your hands, not their hands. And it's in great hands both ways.
Just real quick, never, never, never give up.
That's right.
Just keep trying, and it'll work out.
Tony talked about losing. Well, I never could win an election for any office at Delta Beta. I could never win an office in Province 7. I ran and ran and ran. I'd given up. And then Bill Fitzpatrick came along and appointed me as the graduate member at large in 1978. And that made me realize that, you know, it's okay to lose, because eventually you're going to win. Whether you win that election or not, but you're going to win something. And I won a lot of friends, and it's been well worth it.
Brother Jenny?
Hello, Jenny Donaldson from Indiana Grad, and I have been so blessed to have met and known and had several long conversations. So thanks, a comment, and a request. So my thanks is for your years of dedication of service, to be the trailblazers, to allow us to be in this fraternity, to have continued this fraternity during the dark times and the growth and the expansion. So thank you for that. The comment, all of you have touched upon a sentinel moment where the fraternity, you put your emotions out there on your sleeve, the fraternity, a particular brother, a moment where that led to your path in life. And I think for our brothers out in the audience, consider that as you're interacting with the fraternity, because you could have that sentinel moment where it will change your life. And I think all of us have those stories as well. Now the request for Brother Dr. McGarian, could we have your version of the per capita dues feed and M-card speech? Only the old people get that.
Back in those dark ages, we used to not have all the electronics that we have today, and the M-cards was a big thing, and so it was the McGarian's M-card speech that I gave at every convention, so that's what she's alluding to, and that, so. But am I to continue on?
You have 3 minutes.
I have. Do I only have 3 minutes? I can't do it.
Okay, 2 minutes.
1 minute? For what?
Go ahead and do your presentation. Don't flitter it away.
Okay, all right, okay, I didn't know. I like to know what I have. What I wanted to continue with is my interaction with 8 grand regions. And what I wanted to tell you was that how outstanding these individuals were with me, and each one had to be handled differently, and as the executive director, they were my boss, and I had to work for them and try and make them look good in a good, positive way, working for them to make sure we accomplish their goals. So that taught me a lot in the executive director role. It taught me to listen, which I wasn't very good at first at listening. And it also taught me how to be a problem solver. And some of these these grand regents helped me and taught me. And also, in the problem solving era, on the executive committee, when email came in, I saw from their email discussions they were starting to get a little hot under the collar and arguing with each other. So the next executive committee meeting, I told them, look, you guys have to choose your words very carefully, because you're used to talking on the telephone. On the telephone, you can hear someone's tone and their voice and whether they're mad or not. And if you see somebody face to face, you can see their body language, their eyes, their mouth, and their tone. But when you're in email, when you say, if you don't select your words properly, the receiver can get offended, and that's what I was looking. So I told them, as their problem solver, or I'm not their servant, but I worked with them to help them in the things that I saw were going on. So I told them, we got to stop this, or I'll use the telephone again, or else choose your words properly. So besides being a problem solver with the executive committee in that, it was also problem solving in the chapters and going on the road and meeting a lot of people. And I noticed high ideals in one of the corner of the squares. Ideals means a high level of standard. And Kappa Psi always conforms to a high standard that I see that you maintain too today. And that is also, and in sobriety, people think about drinking and this, but sobriety means soberness of mind, thinking, using the mind, thinking of others. And in this sobriety, I learned how to do something besides Kappa Psi. In Norman, where I live, 29 years ago, my wife and I and our kids, we started a feeding the poor and what have you, but it started out that way. But in 29 years ago, we fed 24, and last year we fed 2,000. And I have 200 volunteers that I control. And I was sort of a control freak on the executive committee, but if you give me a job to do, I got to do it, and if I'm going to be responsible, it's got to be my way. So They helped me grow in that way, and I took it out to the community, and we're feeding these. I have 200 volunteers, I have team captains, and I'm in charge of all that. And I have the family working and everybody in the community. So, what's the point of that? If you want to do something, you can do it. And if you want to be something, you can do it. If you think you can, you can. And I was criticized in the town that it will never work. All the other agencies didn't want it because there was politics involved. I said, we're going to do it. You tell me you can't do it, I'm going to do it. And so we did it. We only had 24 people the first year, but now I got everybody, the businesses, the newspaper, and everybody's behind us. So what does that mean? If you want to do something, you can do it. If you want to be in this fraternity and be a leader in this fraternity, you can do it. If you're shy, get over it. Just try the small-scale things, be on the committee like I said earlier. But if you want to be Grand Region, you can. Go for it. Don't inhibit yourself, and I take issue with Brother Furbush. When I was his executive director, I told him, don't criticize yourself. And he belittles himself, but he was not a bad Grand Region.
It's not a good one either.
But you're right. But okay, I got one last thing to say. As a writer, Shakespeare said that what is past is prologue. And in my novels, I use prologue to hook you because prologue sets the stage for the next act. And what is past is prologue, what Shakespeare meant, and what I'm using as the analogy is this. This is your past, everybody up here, and everyone before us. And we're your prologue, and you're the next act. So we've given you the roadmap, and it's for you to enact or get involved and do the next act. We set the stage for the next act, but you're the next act. And we wish you well, and God bless you all. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, I'm glad you left me a couple of minutes, Bob.
Okay.
I'd just like to say that I was involved with the fraternity on the national level when the bottom of the barrel. And like most of us said, we're not going to get involved in that. But I watched the fraternity go from the bottom of the barrel to overflowing in the barrel. When I walked into that room last night, when I got here and saw 600 plus members, and I go back, I was just flipping through the histories of Kappa Psi while the talks were going on, and seeing where the attendance of most of the GCDs, either the GCD was postponed, or the attendance was 150 plus, or you had to pay your own way, to where it is right now, and the amount of money that the foundation, I happen to sit in to where this foundation was giving all this money away. You all got something to be very, very, very proud of. And like Bob said and everybody else said, if you want to do it, do it. I wanted to be Grand Region. I set that goal as a collegiate member in Gamma Pi, and I got it. And I wanted to be president of the Missouri Board of Pharmacy, and I went for it, and I got it. And I wanted to be an active person in NABP and worked for it. I couldn't be president of NABP because for various reasons, but because of my involvement and the members knowing that I wanted to participate and give it, they honored me with honorary president and various other issues. So you can do, if you want to do it, you can do it, but you got to put your mind to it. You saw what these gentlemen did up here, and it's very simple. Kappa Psi gave me the knowledge and the want to move forward. And if you go back and read some of the history and read some of the masks, I always give credit to Kappa Psi. And I'm very proud of you brothers out there, and I'm glad to see you are where you are today.
So thank you very much, past Grand Regents, executive directors, editors of the mask, and foundation presidents, and the whole lot. Without you, I feel like this fraternity would not exist. But really appreciate your time. It's been a great 2 hours for myself, just hearing these stories and learning the history more of Kappa Psi. So one last round of applause for our esteemed legends and leaders. So I know that the time for the event is up, but they've been gracious enough to be up here for another 30 minutes if you want to come up and talk with them. I know some of you have caucuses to go to, and you might probably want to get some food or something, so by all means do that. But if you guys have questions for them, come up to the stage and get more wisdom from our legends and leaders. Thank you all.